Hey, good morning, Melanie.
Good morning, Derek. Always. Hello.
What's going on?
Living and breathing.
That's always a good thing. I hope it's a little bit more than that.
Listen, I'm grateful for the small things.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we're actually in the new year. We just turned into the new year, new you, new everything. So
Yes.
feeling good about that. And I was thinking back to when we first began all of this
Yes.
and some of your earliest ideas. And one of the things that you were sort of driving was this idea of we can own things.
Yeah.
And what I was sort of thinking about as I was remembering those conversations was we've come a long way and we've had some really good conversations around not just we can own things, but we can build things too.
Yeah.
And, some of our more later guests, so, well, even actually a variety of guests. So Melinda talking about building community in, different ways. Carlene talking about expat communities, just touching upon it. She didn't really go into it, but talking about expat communities, building things overseas. And then Yako talking about building community in Dorchester. And I was thinking about, we're kind of like moving into this area around building and maybe not so much institution building only, but also community building as well.
And one of the questions is, how do you fund these enterprises?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We build things, we can fund things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the areas left for us to explore.
Yes. Well, that plus what's the mindset behind someone who builds things? And I think we should also think, not just physically building things, but also figuratively building things. So what does it take to build community and to get other people thinking about building community too?
Yeah, which so much of that does involve seeing things, envisioning things that don't yet exist. And my mind continues to go to the conversation with historian Chris Manjapra about reparations. To create things together as a community, to do things collectively does mean to dare to see something into being that just hasn't existed yet. So it's exciting to encounter leaders, innovators who do that as a life practice.
Right. And with Chris as well, he also brought up the whole idea of the mindset too. So reparations being the process around changing the mindset so you can change
Yes.
the possibilities.
Consciousness changing. Yes.
Yes, consciousness changing. Yes. So yeah, I think we're beginning, we sort of just drifted. I don't know if we've really drifted, but we've kind of moved into this area around building community, what community looks like, and then what it takes to sort of get into that mindset, or maybe people are already in that mindset and they sort of spread it out to other people. But I think today's guest is going to have a lot to say about that.
Yes.
And I'm very curious to hear his journey, because I feel like he has a community mindset generally. And I'm curious to hear like how he honed that and like how he's sort of, what do you say, inspiring other people, spreading the gospel of community to other people. So I'd love to hear.
Yes, I hear spreading the gospel of community, but like daring to build economic independence too. So daring about making money, marshaling funds, moving funds. That's very compelling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, should we do a quick intro?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Today's guest is Glynn Lloyd, who's been a pioneer in the field of transformative urban economic development for over 25 years. He's the founder of City Fresh Foods, a nationally renowned food service business, which grew 15% annually over 20 years to an 8-figure revenue. Glynn is also a founder of the Urban Farming Institute, a community-led nonprofit supporting the development of the urban farming industry in Massachusetts, and helped establish the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, or BECMA, a coalition of Black business and community leaders working to improve economic indicators in Black communities. Currently, Glynn is executive director of Mill Cities Community Investments, the first Black-led community development financial institution in Massachusetts. He's also the founding executive director of the Foundation for Business Equity, which is executing a unique approach to scaling up Black and Latino enterprises to close the racial wealth gap. This foundation recently merged with Mill Cities Community Investments to broaden their impact. Glynn lives in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, and we're excited to have him here to follow his brain.
Hey, Glynn.
Hello.
How's it going?
Hey, We're here. Good to see you guys. I've been following you guys. I love this podcast. I'm a new fan, so
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate having me on.
No, glad to have you here. Glad to have you here, especially as one of our community experts. Like, we're definitely looking forward to hearing about just your mindset. Like, would love to start you off talking about your mindset. Like, what is it that sort of what has driven you and what continues to drive you when you think about community?
Sure, no, I love that question, and I hope I'm constantly learning. So the term expert to me sometimes is something I shy away from. But I'll tell you, for me, a lot of this started when I was teaching. I was one of the I guess inaugural members of Teach for America, and I was down in Louisiana, and I grew up in the Boston area. But I knew I wanted to come back to my community and really focused on how do we kind of, level up? Like, how do we get our young folks kind of, learning and getting out of the community? Literally, that was the mentality, right? Like, how do we get out? And I reversed that in my brain. Says, no, how do we really improve the community that we're living in, so we don't have to get out? And for me, it started with food. How do we make sure that we have more accessible to food options, and we're getting healthier food in our systems. It also led to entrepreneurship. It also led to urban farming. So it really, the spark was, looking at our community holistically, and how do we really, how do we improve from the community up?
You make it sound so easy. Oh, entrepreneurship to community farming. Let's break that down a little bit. Like, what types of entrepreneurship and why urban farming?
Yeah, well, this is going back in time now, Derek, but I remember reading this Globe article back in the late 80s, and it was about the global fish supply, and it was like one of those journalistic, like 3-part series. But what they was basically saying was, we were taking more fish out of the sea than the sea could replenish. Right? So you think, well, that's kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And so that got me thinking about, what about our food supply? And so that was kind of the original, like, wait a second, if we're going to be self-sustaining as a community, as a people, we got to understand how food works.
Yes,
and that got my interest, on the food side, and that turned into a very interesting path, because fast forward to today. And I'm still very involved, obviously, with the company City Fresh Foods, which is feeding a lot of kids in Boston, a lot of our elderly people. I've danced around this thing around local food production, and we could talk more about that. But to me, it was one of those, like, kind of like, if we're going to be self-sufficient, we got to understand some of the basics. And one of the basics is food. Another basic is, energy, right? Another basic is housing. But that's where I kind of led into my, my journey, I guess, in a lot of ways.
And has it been easy convincing people, or people sort of just bought in pretty quickly, or how much work goes into that?
Well, it's interesting. It's a funny, I have this kind of philosophy of what I call, like, pick your platform. Like, there's platforms that we can actually do our work around. And, early on, this is years ago, I was in Rhode Island the other day talking with a woman who runs, like, the Food Policy Council or something. And I was bringing back all these old memories, because I spent a lot of time in the local food movement. We'll call it that way, right? And these are a lot of progressive, white folks who, kind of trying to make sure that, the sustainability and the locality, and that's all important work. I think and so I guess you come in these different circles, and people are committed, they're dedicated. I mean, and I think the challenge sometimes is the crossover. How do we communicate that to our folks? And why is that important? Black folk have an interesting relationship to land, obviously, right?
Yes.
And farming. And so I remember early, like, what are you doing? Like, no, I'm about getting past that stuff, because it's bad memories, obviously, right? Especially the previous generation. Not all. I mean, we obviously, I think, gardening and so on and so forth is one of the most popular hobbies in America, right? There is this kind of natural inclination to move in that direction. We have some stuff to move through, but
yes.
A lot of interesting conversations around this stuff. And I think, when you look at the current work, like the Urban Farming Institute and some of these other programs, like in the Food Project and things of that nature, you see this, I don't know, there's more acceptance around, it's important for us to understand how to grow our own food, and how to get reconnected to the soil in a special way.
But you decided not to stay in food or stay in gardening or stay in urban farming. You've moved into developing. So developing projects, I don't know if you do projects in Boston, but you do some on the North Shore. So how did you make that transition, and where do you see the connections there?
Yeah, well, my journey actually is interesting. It was really through entrepreneurship initially, right? And so the standing up of City Fresh Foods, which, the high level of that, if folks don't know, we're one of the larger food service companies, black now employee owned actually. We have employees own a chunk of our company, which I'm excited to say, and these are folks in the community. So that's back, and I don't want to mention years. It goes back a couple of decades, right? And when I was working within, and that essentially was, Meals on Wheels to elder folks. We got into the school business, charter schools, got into daycare, so we're providing a lot of food to a lot of community, a lot of our community, right? But through that's when I really got deeper into kind of this local food movement stuff. And that's where the nonprofit stuff started to kind of, creeping in. And that's where actually, literally, we created the Urban Farming Institute at the side desk of when I was working at City Fresh Foods. My brother will always tell me, "Are you working here or not?" But so I guess the point is it's never a straight path. I guess it's a meandering path that a lot of us take. And we're into something and we learn something else, we kind of move over here. But to answer your question, Derek, where I'm at now is I learned pretty quickly about the power of money and capital and equity. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time now around how do we move capital to our community. And I'm more than happy to jump into those details.
Let's go. I'm curious about the mindset that drives you there. Like it does seem, Glynn, that you get out of the bed in the morning, you've got this mission to push the edge, push boundaries, change what access looks like, and to be at decision-making tables that Black people typically haven't been at, and creating decision-making tables. So just curious about, like, for you, what drives you? Like, what is your philosophy and framework around doing the thing that gets money into the hands directly of Black and Latino neighborhoods?
Sure. I love that question, and I've been enjoying watching you guys talk to your guests over the span of this podcast, and I've heard it come up multiple times, but I'll just say it bluntly: it's about power, right? Yes. Like we're in a capitalist society. It looks like we're going to be in a capitalist society for the foreseeable future, right? And we have to understand how it works. And obviously it's called capitalism. And so I'll admit, it's been a journey for me. I mean, I got a request to work in a bank through their foundation arm, right? And before I went to work at that bank, because literally I was an employee of the bank, and this is the first time I moved from kind of my social entrepreneurship, community activist kind of whatever hat into a corporate setting, where I was like, oh, check this out. And the reality is what I wanted, we understand where we're working and how it works. So you know what I did? There's a little tidbit for the audience. I went to Khan Academy and he's got these 7-minute clips, right? And I spent 2 or 3 hours on the fractal reserve system, which is our banking system. So I want to understand how this banking system works, right? And it's very simple actually in a lot of ways, but it's wild. Because if you really think about how our banking system works, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right? Where you put money into a bank, right? And they only have to reserve only a certain percentage of that. And they take that money and they lend it out, and they make a margin on that money, right? By lending it out. But you think your money's there, but it's really not, and that's how the system works. And so really understanding the fundamentals and the basics of how money works is important. And then as you understand it, then you say, well, where do we position ourselves so that we actually can, as you guys have said on this call, move towards real reparations, right? Repairing the harm that has taken place for generational for our folks, right? And that's a longer conversation, but I tell you right now, understanding how to move capital strategically into the hands of our folks is a big part of the conversation of how we level the playing field.
Yeah.
What kind of hurdles or barriers do you see? Because there's moving capital into the community, but there's getting community to access that capital. So is there a middleman, or is there like a third point, or is there something that kind of blocks or transfers. Like, people talk about it in different ways, but I'm not really sure like we're clear in terms of how those gaps are filled or how those gaps are met.
That's a great question, Derek. And so just a one-on-one from my world is there's different kind of capital vehicles, right? So I just talked about banking, and unfortunately, the stats are not on our side, right? I guess redlining is the name of it. Oh no, redlining is the opposite word of what you guys are, you're trying to talk about here, right? Where it just wasn't moving, and because of racist policies and bias and discrimination, all this other stuff. You work your way down every kind of tranche of capital. When you think about angel investing, you think about VCs. When you think about just your rich uncles, right? So where is that who has the decision making of that capital is question number one, right?
No, well, actually, who has the capital, right? I mean,
right. Well, in the case of the VCs and so forth, and the angels and the rich uncles, they have the and that's been accumulated. And we could talk about the history, right? It's been accumulated on one side, of the racial aisle. But when you talk about the institutions like banks and so on and so forth, right? And in some ways, that's some of our capital too, because we have depositors, that they're handling our money. But who's in control of it, I guess, is the point too. So who's a decision maker? And I just want to say quickly, for educational purposes. You introduced me who is the executive director of MCCI, and what that is a community development finance institution. There's a lot of CDFI, and just it's interesting because CDFIs came about in the 90s. It came out of the Clinton administration, actually. And it came to pass because they realized that capital wasn't hitting these red line communities, right? And so they created these, what I call kind of community financial institutions. They're kind of like community banks. And I got to be honest with you, they stood the test of time, because here we are, like 30 or 40 years later, and they've grown. It's been a maturing industry. When you look at a very snapshot, I want to say there's 450 billion or something that is under the auspices of CDFIs, which sounds like a lot of money. It's not a lot of money when you think about nationally and so on and so forth. But it's money. It's real money. And what we've seen is it's a platform where these organizations are more embedded in these communities. And so they've really, when we've had like the 2007, 2008, major economic disruption, we had the pandemic. CDFIs, in fact, actually stayed strong. They actually got stronger because they're embedded in these communities and they're putting out capital. So just FYI. So here I sit now on an institution that can actually, lend capital out to small business owners, to actually homeowners who are repairing their homes and doing lead abatement. And we also, on the small business side, we also have the ability to do equity, which is, doing like shareholder type investment. So this it's kind of like an asset-based approach. Like I'm like an asset manager trying to say, I have capital that comes into me, different sources of it. I could talk about that. And then I'm getting it back on the street to our people. And if you look around and who has that ability, not many of us, let's just be clear, right? And then even we're trying to push our mainstream institutions to do better. And some of them are trying. I mean, we'll give them some credit. But frankly, when we get into this conversation about how capital flows to our communities, our neighborhoods, we have, I think, Derek, your question is spot on. The referee or the intermediary, we don't have many of those. They're few and far between. And that's another reason that compounds the problem.
Where does the money come from?
For the CDFI, it comes from a couple places. It comes from the Treasury. So there's a CDFI fund. They help, but it's a fraction of the money, but it's important money. We love that money because it's actually free money. It's really set up so that we work in conjunction with the banks. So you got the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, where banks are supposed to be putting more of their capital into these communities, red line communities. Yes. So we are supposed to be the kind of the alternative unbankable. So the folks who really can't go to the banks can come to us. But right. We have to get that capital from the banks. And actually, a little dirty secret, the banks lend it to us. So we're negotiating with the banks around the cost and so on and so forth. So it's a very interesting scenario. And then the third bucket is philanthropy, or I'd say, or government too. I mean, I call it like it's all in that bucket of like free money. So we have some interesting supplies into us. Now, we're not a depository institution. So you have your minority, MDIs, your minority deposit institutions. That usually that's how you build up your reservoir where you lend out. We don't have that option, which is fine. We have these other supply capitals that. So part of my job is always, I'm always on the hunt too, looking for capital too, so we can pass it through, as they say.
Can we go back a step? Because I'm thinking about asset building. And if we think about these red line neighborhoods that were disinvested, the asset, whether it's the house or the business or the property, whatever, has gone down in value, or it hasn't increased in value relative to other places around it. And so when the venture capitalist wants to invest in an asset, they want to invest in something that's going to make a large enough return. So what would inspire a VC or a CDFI or somebody else to say, yes, we're going to invest in these assets, even if they're lower? Like, how do you determine what assets are worth investing in?
I love that question. So first off, it's, again, just understanding a little bit of the capital world. Where you're going to find VCs is really in high growth markets, right? They're going to be in places where I'm going to get, I may try 4 or 5 options, and one of my options is going to be a home run, right? I'm going to get, 20, 30x off times my return, right? And so, and that's in it's usually it's high growth, it's tech. And guess where we're not? We're not so much in those spaces, right? So when I said we can do equity investments, we can come in similar to how the VCs come in to some of these options, all these investment options. But we're taking the approach of what we're calling singles and doubles, right? Like if we have a $5-10 million company, they can get to a $20-30 million company. That's success, right? And we don't need to be get to $1 billion, right? And so it would be nice, but that's how we consider our pipeline of opportunities in terms of what we think about where we're investing. Now, look we do have people in tech, and we do have people trying to make these home runs, or the gazelles and all that stuff. Great, but frankly, some of those folks can get them capital from the mainstream, right? Because they're that good. So we want to be in a place where there's less access, right? And then we can there's this whole thing in the capital world called underwriting. So we're going to be look at underwriting differently than the traditional people, because we know our people, right? We understand the struggle, we understand what they're going through. The fact that you're a black or brown business and you're still around and you're like a couple million in sales, that tells me there's some risk mitigation there, because you've survived in a hostile environment. You know what I'm saying? So we're looking at it differently in terms of how we think about our investments. If that makes sense.
What are some wins? What are some big picture that you've been excited about?
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, no. I mean, how much time do we have? One of the ones that we like to talk about is it's a commercial cleaning company. Maybe I'll leave the names out, but they came to us and they were around 10 million in sales, right? And very quickly, this is an example of supporting leadership in the right way, right? So a really smart CEO, entrepreneur, at the time had the wrong COO, right? Chief Operating Officer, right? Is number 2. And we first said, listen, if you really want to get to 20, 30, 40 million, what you want to do, which is that's the whole growth side, right? You need to rethink about who's around you, right? So that's a very important conversation with a lot of our entrepreneurs, is who's the talent around you, not just today, but tomorrow. Like who do you really need around you to make sure that you can function a complex multi-million-dollar company? We helped them get what was a really unique find, which was both a COO and a CFO, and really high caliber, had a lot of experience in the industry. And then we were able to get some capital to them to fund him coming in, because part of it is, when you go to the bank for stuff, you don't usually go to the bank for talent. You go to the bank for, you need to, security or collateral. So we were able to get some capital to him, and we were able to, through our ecosystem approach, open up some doors around some new contracts. So that's just a story where he's like, I want to say 3 times the sales right now.
Love it.
Than when he first started. I can go on, but I'll tell you another one, just on the trade side. This is probably the largest Black-owned union electrical shop in Massachusetts. But they came to us, they were smaller. And what we work with them around, because we do more than just the capital, we do the high touch advisory. Clearly. And we work with them around their office organization. We help them get an estimator, set up their office in a way, because these are 2 very talented electricians. But were they good business owners? Right? So those are two different things. And we really supported them in setting themselves up. But most importantly, they were having this conversation internally, is, do we unionize, right? And I'll never forget it. Like yesterday, I said, well, you got, the question is, the business is there, because if we think about Boston and in the construction industry, a lot of heavy union in the Boston area, and we were concerned, where are they going to get the business? Where they're going to get shut out? Because once you transfer over, that's it. You're not, some people try to do both sides of it. And we could talk about those companies. Bottom line is, they went over to do a union. We really helped them think that through. And these guys are, I want to say they're 12x what they were. And these are good jobs. These are union jobs. So that we were, a few years ago. So that's just a couple of. I mean, I can go on, but those are some of the things that we do with some of our entrepreneurs.
I have so many questions for you, Glynn. So I'm gonna try to parse them out one by one. So ecosystem, you mentioned ecosystem a minute ago. So with all of these small businesses that you work with, so whether they're or small businesses or homeowners or other folks, do you help them come together as an ecosystem? So we started off this conversation talking about community. So do you help them work together as a community, or how does that work in some way with what you do?
Yeah. Well, there's different layers to that question. I'll say quickly that, the road of an entrepreneur is a lonely. You all know, Melanie know, right? Like, you don't have much time for nothing, right? So you got, there's different phases of your operation. So what we try to do on the entrepreneurship is try to create a community there. We do. So the pandemic didn't help, obviously, because it has shut a lot of the communal aspect down, but we're back at it again now. So, in terms of events, in terms of getting people together, I run a CEO roundtable. So these are CEOs that come, once a month, and we talk about, it's like a therapy session for the CEOs. So, so we do that as much as possible. But I think for the entrepreneurs are hard because they're so damn busy, right? And that's good. Like, you should be working on your company, right? Obviously. The other part of the ecosystem is all these other players that support small business. And I'll tell you this very quickly. When the pandemic hit, and we had their first round of PPP, I don't know if you remember this, and it went out through the banks.
Oh yeah.
And it was dismal around Black and Brown. Like, people were like, whoa, because we didn't have a lot of these relationships. We were kind of last to know, right? So it was a group of us that remember, there was going to be another round, like in about 3 weeks or something. And we got together and says, no, we're going to make sure that our people are going to be ready. And a good friend of ours, when Malia Lazoo was over at Berkshire, I made the call to her, and she says, look, we can't do it legally, but we'll open a door. But if you get the people ready to go to that door, we'll make sure that we get some money. It's PPP's going through. People got caught on. Other banks didn't want, FOMO didn't want to be left behind.
Yes.
We were able to get millions of dollars out to immigrant, Black, Brown, low income, those folks who didn't get it the first round, right? What happened was the state picked up on it. So long and the story is that turned into what was probably the largest grant program for small businesses, I think, maybe in the country, but here they did 40 million out in grants. That's in 2020, that fall, which turned into over almost 200 million when they mainstreamed it. So the Baker administration loved the fact that we were able to get this money out to where it needed to go. The 40 million that happened in the fall, I forget the stats, but it was like 80% minority, or I use the word minority in at the state level. But so it was real deal. Like, in a lot of these businesses, these are $75,000 grants. So it kept a lot of businesses alive, to be honest with you. So I say all that that was a long-winded saying of, we already knew each other, a lot of the players in the space, but that really brought us together, in the heat of battle. And so we have this ecosystem. We have these relationships with Leaf and Boston Impact Initiative and the Boston Foundation and these folks who are all about it. Like, they're down, but we're trying to be smart and strategic about, how do we leverage these energies, this ecosystem, so it's really being impactful. And frankly, I do play a little bit of a very strong voice in it.
So okay, next question then is, and we've kind of drew upon this in some previous conversations. So we're getting folks who have very few assets, low to no assets, we're getting them up to the mainstream. So whether that's on the business front or that's in the homeownership front, how do we help them protect those assets and maintain those assets? Because that's been a big piece of conversation through a lot of the conversations that we've had.
I was thinking about that coming on here, and I have a couple words of advice. Estate planning. First off, I just did it myself recently. I'm like, what, so it's an experience we all, Black and Brown people, we need to get on the phone and and lay that out, because
Can you walk us through what you had to go through?
it's find a professional, because it's legal work, and essentially it's you preparing upon your demise, right? What happens to your assets, right? Your estate. And whether you own a home or you have stocks and bonds, whatever, it makes it easier for your family on the other side. So it just keeps it out of court, because you've already laid out how you want your assets to be distributed, right? And we've had like very famous people not get this right.
Yeah.
And we know, right? And then it's it's a mess. And so and then we have people who don't even do that don't plan at all, and we lose it. And so I can't overstate enough. Certain things need experts, and you have experts in that field who actually know and work you through. So I went with a company. Someone recommended somebody, and what I did in the process, personal, it brought my parents along, because they didn't really have their shit fully tied up. So it just got our whole family tight.
Good. Having a conversation. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So we got, and I got to give a big shout out to my dad, because he's a guy that worked hard all his life, right? It wasn't extravagant, but just like built some solid assets. And so blessed me and my brother. And so we want to make sure that, that continues on to the next generations in our family.
And one important layer of estate planning, yes, there's the will, which we tend to think of, but a big part of that is during your lifetime also protecting your property, your house, your business, by having it in a trust, right? Correct. So the trust is like a layer of protection from you, an individual. And so that's a big, like, just even thinking about trust planning and what's going to be part of that. So it's fun, it's interesting, it's exciting work, actually. And it's just about getting over the hurdle of feeling like, well, how do I do this? You don't need to know how. You let yourself be guided by someone who's going to help run you through the questions.
Exactly.
All right, Glenn, I have all these questions. You said you speak very quickly.
Oh, I'll slow it down.
No, it's fine. I'm keeping up. I mean, you're not losing me, but there's a lot of questions that keep coming up. So, you told us about your personal journey. You told, in terms of how you got into what you do. You told us about all the different industries and how those sort of weave together your interests and also supporting community. And so now I'm kind of thinking, well, what do you see going forward? So whether it's a 5-year horizon or 10-year, 20-year, what do you think? I know you're thinking something.
Well, I've always said there's two existential threats to us as a species right now, right? And one is this equity issue, right? Obviously, this racial equity issue, and we could see what happens when it continues to grow, right? The other one, I think you're going to guess, is I got to tell you, it's. I was just driving. I was in New Hampshire yesterday in the middle of December, and it was raining. And so it's happening in front of us around the climate, the habitat, like. So I'm really. I think it's nice to have racial equity on a planet that sustains us, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really been taking up a lot of my energy. We just launched what we're calling a Solar Plus program, where it allows, this gets back into some of the housing stuff, moderate to lower income homeowners to go all the way off of carbon and bring in heat pumps and bring in solar and so on and so forth, right? And I'm excited because, I think at this point it's almost like it's like a race to the finish. Like, how quickly can we transition off of these bad habits that we all collectively, look at, we're all kind of part of the system.
Well, our communities have the worst impact, the first and most severe impacts.
Exactly, right? So we'll be the first to be impacted negatively, obviously, right? And that not just, when you go globally, right? People were by the oceans, and so it's so it really is. I literally was almost in tears the other night when I looked outside and it was raining out in mid-December, like, because I'm of the generation where it was snow on the ground like early December and kind of stayed on the ground, right? Like, and my kids don't even know what that is, and so it's almost like So I guess to answer your question, we have to be like, we have to continue to have hope, because if you lose hope, you're in trouble. But we have to be bold with our energy around like the appropriate change, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. So I think those are I'll continue to be committed to the racial equity, obviously, right? And I'm really going to be pushing on how do we rebalance, how our relationship, to our habitat.
Do you see similar organizations to yours, so MCCI or any of the others nationally? So there was something you said just a minute ago that made me think about Louisiana. And so, but it could really be anywhere. It could be Florida, it could be Georgia, it could be California, in terms of racial equity and environmental sustainability. And so I was like, are you networked with other organizations across the country, or what does that look like on a national scale?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we come in contact. I mean, I'm a bigger fan of Jessica Norway and the Runway Project out of Oakland, doing some innovative work. I mean, I know there's been some innovative work happening out of Buffalo, New York, in terms of some, they look at the whole ecosystem from a community approach. But I gotta be honest with you, Derek, you know me. I'm kind of a local guy, and that's where I really dig in, and I think that's where that's where we live. That's where we can have impact. And more than willing to share. I do think that some of the processes, for example, we talk about City Fresh Foods and feeding a lot of people. There's certain lessons there that can maybe be exported. Even what we're doing with some of the equity work around the investment. So more than happy to share. But I do think there's something about this whole thing of franchising and people swooping in from outside. And no, I think real work happens at the ground level. That's where the relationships are. And so that's where people need to make change from within their communities.
And have you seen people swooping in? Are you referring to something in particular?
Oh yeah. You see, we see it all the time, right? We see these programs that well, not to be named, but who have a good formula, and then they're kind of pressured to take it on the road to expand, nationally. I mean, we know the programs, right? So if I'm in those other cities, you're coming my way, right? And so and it's competitive for funding and all that other fun stuff. Sometimes, they're good programs and they work, but I think I'm more of the philosophy is, how do you really get solutions to happen from a grassroots ground up approach in these communities? Because that's what has staying power, and that's what I think has more impact.
So Glynn, before we move on from some bigger picture questions, I'm curious what the mission is of the Urban Farm Institute. Like, what are y'all? Is it a sort of laboratory of sorts, or what's your impact you're looking to have?
Yeah. Well, one is, I should be clear. I mean, I helped found it, and I went off the board now over a year ago, even though I still stay in touch. And so I don't want to speak for the organization as it is today per se, but I think broadly speaking, when I was very involved, it was really, remember, it was a creation over a period of like 14 years. So when we were started on it, at that point, there was a lot of vacant land in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, right? And people didn't want it. Now people want it, in a different way, because now the Melanies of the world say, wait a second, there's a real estate opportunity here.
That's part of asking. It's like, to me, it is so important for communities to own land, like to own.
Well, that's what. Well, first off, so what happened was, we said, well, at that point, this is going back in I think the 90s. It had been laying fallow for many, many years. And so my whole point was like, well, but the collective point was, let's do something about it. Let's get it productive. So let's get it productive. We can grow food. We can get some of these young folks' hands dirty. And that was the general gist. And I also at that point, I was buying salad greens and all that stuff from California. That made no sense. So you can grow that stuff right up the street. Yeah. So that was the whole impetus around getting these things started. I'll tell you a funny story. Sportsman's Tennis Club, that we got some land behind Sportsman's Tennis Club. We, on a quarter acre, we grew $20,000 worth of greens in one season. You can grow those greens. You can cut them like 5 times. Like every 5 or 6 weeks, they pop up, boom, and we would bring them down to high-end restaurants. So it was. I was trying to say, well, can you make a business out of this?
Yes.
Not really, but I was trying. The reality was, it turned more into okay, it's just to reconnect people to their space around them. Like, you know what? There's a vacant lot beside you. There's a porch, open porch. There's a little backyard. You can actually put that into some food production. And by the way, you can produce a lot of food in a small space. So that's kind of what it's turned into, is like reconnecting folks to the ability to say, oh, well, what do I need? Well, here's some compost. Here's some tools. Here's some seeds. And I think they also are thinking about young to old. So they get the elderly involved. They get the young people involved. So I'm a huge fan of that, because I do think, you look at places like Cuba, people, there's a high level of production happening, more sustainability. We need to be thinking like that as a community. Like, how do we like be producing more of our own food, which is like healthier? Because don't get me started with what our kids are eating, this processed stuff. So anywho, that I do think that there's a big role for that in our community. But I think less from a business economic sense, more from a community, like let's plant fruit trees and we all can take some fruit off the tree. That type of approach.
Yeah, thank you.
So one more question for you, Glynn. As a serial entrepreneur, what's next for you?
Oh, well, I got shareholders, bro. So I'm holding tight. I'm actually enjoying myself right now. Like, I think we're at the early stage of a growth period for MCCI. We will be rebranding this thing in the next couple of years. So you'll have me back as a new name, but yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. I do think that there's some interesting opportunity for the growth of City Fresh Foods that I'm still tied with. And so yeah, so I'm one of those guys. I like to grow and then have people help run and manage it. But right now, I don't think no major pivots. But yeah, that's all. I'll end that answer.
Okay, I see the warning signs going up. Okay.
I have one more question. Is there anything you would leave us with and leave our audience with about balance sheet power? Because I've heard you use that phrase and I love it.
Oh yeah. Well, just someone who is an investor and actually, and works for a financial institution, balance sheet, a strong balance sheet gives you freedom at the end of the day, right? It gives you options. And what I mean by that is, like, we've had a disadvantage. We know the history, right? And we still have certain controls of like, how do we build our savings? How do we build the asset side of the equation? I think this whole show is about, real estate and so on and so forth. So when you're building on that side, I think, Melanie, you were asked a question on the show a couple of times ago and said, well, what would you do with $800,000 of reparations? And your answering was interesting because you said, I would leverage it. Yeah. Right. I would take that, invest it in 3 properties. Right. And and so now I'm building my asset and I'm leveraging other capital to build that's the power of a balance sheet, because you basically can you can leverage other resources and assets as you also create stability for yourself. So I can't emphasize enough. It's one of the first things that banks look for when they're looking to invest in you, is like, well, what kind of security is there? And so everything about the show, what I've heard is about ownership, and you can own different things. You can own land, you can own your home, you can own stocks and bonds, but that's the culture that we're in, and we need to like have an ownership mindset.
Yes.
We have to, and ownership mindset means you're strengthening your balance sheet.
Love it.
Great, thank you so much. I feel like now we need to have someone on here to talk about balance sheets, like what they are and how to make them come together, because we talked about that quite a bit. But that maybe Glynn, you'll come back and help us talk about that at some point.
More than happy to.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Yay.
So, Glynn, we really appreciate it. And for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions or your comments in whatever platform you're on. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Black Planning Forum. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.